Well, thank you for your welcome. It is awesome to be here at Alstonville. I always enjoy coming to Alstonville. So it is a lovely part of New South Wales, I must say. Beautiful and green, and always a pretty place to come to. When I was growing up, right from a young age, when I started at school, my mum, now mum being mum, with 6 children, put in place a few rules to keep the family working together and growing together. And one of those rules was that after school, you'd pull out our readers and all spend 20 minutes reading to mum. And if we'd done our reader that day or something, or that week, it was something else she'd pull out and say, read this to me. She would make me, for 20 minutes a day, read to her. And I remember sometimes whinging saying, Mum, why do this? Can't I go out inside and play? Can't I go and swim? Can't I go and feed the chooks or whatever? But Mum would say, no, 20 minutes a day, you'll thank me for it one day. And she'll say the places that you'll go just by reading. Looking back, I'm thankful to my mother that she had that routine in place for all of her children. Because somewhere along the way, when I was reading Dick and Jane, who remembers Dick and Jane? And was it Dora? Dora and Jack, was it? And Nip the dog and Fluff the cat. It dates me a little bit, but that was my reading experience. Remember the day I learnt that big word called look? It was a big day to actually learn how to read that word. But Mum instilled in all her children a love of reading. And this day, that habit has not been broken. I still, first thing in the morning, when I get to the office, spend at least 20 minutes to half an hour reading. And as I read, a lot of research comes across my desk. And right across the Christian church, including the Adventist church, we find that we have a problem. A problem that is what we call a slow bleed from our pews, or the back door syndrome. The stats are telling me that in most of our churches, we're losing between 50 and 90% of our children from our pews. Now, as a dad, as a children's ministries pastor, and as a member, that worries me. Because these are your kids, these are my kids, these are kids that have been involved in our programs, have been involved in our pathfinders and our Sabbath schools, etc., but for some reason have not chosen to continue in the faith as they get older. Often, according to the stats, they've made their decision to leave before they reach their teenage years. And they act on that when they get their Ps, or when they go to university or to college. And the research is now starting to come in and it's asking the question, is there anything that we can do as a church and as a parents to stop this slow bleed? And I'm quite interested because I have 2 children. Young son who's just turned 18, and my daughter who's 15 who thinks she's 18 some days. And it challenges me and takes me to my knees and takes me to the Word and takes me to reading those stats and contemplating what we can do to turn this around. It reminds me of the story in Nehemiah. Have your book, the Bible, take it open to Nehemiah chapter 4. One of those prophets in the Old Testament, Nehemiah chapter 4. We find that in the Old Testament, these prophets were raised up when there was a crisis. And often there was a crisis of faith, a crisis of the people of Israel turning away from God and falling away from God. And God raises up a prophet time and time again to call his people back to him. And with Nehemiah, we find an interesting story here in that the people of Israel have been in captivity. And now they're crying out to go back to their homeland, to rebuild the walls, to rebuild the temple, to rebuild their place of worship and their place of sacrifice. And we find in chapter 4 that permission has been given, and Nehemiah takes a group back to rebuild. In verse 1 it says, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, what are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what they are building? If even a fox climbed up on it, he would break down their wall of stones. Here we find, imagine it, there are the people, they've marched back to their homeland. And there they find the rubble, there they find the buildings torn down, there they find the walls torn down, and they pick up those blackened stones and they begin to clean them off and begin to shape them, and they begin to carry them back to the wall to rebuild the wall. And while they're doing that, the enemies that surround them are looking and are laughing and are mocking. What does Nehemiah do? In chapter 4, he's a man of prayer. He says, hear us, O God. Verse 4, he says, hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. Interesting prayer here. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or block out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So Nehemiah prays and asks for God's strength, but also God's judgment. Have you ever prayed a prayer of judgment? I don't often pray that. But Nehemiah says, look, vindicate us and take your judgment down on those around you. We need to rebuild this wall. Then he tells them to keep going. He says, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God, posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the labourers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we'll be right there among them, and we'll kill them and put the end to their work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Nehemiah has a problem as a leader. He's got the rumours going around that the enemy are coming. And that they're all coming down to descend on Jerusalem and to tear down those walls that have been rebuilt. Not only that, the strength of those who are working is giving out as well. And so there's now trouble from within the camp. Nehemiah, a man of vision. This is what he does. Therefore, he says in verse 13, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families. with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah, a man of vision, he says, at the weakest places of the wall, he put the guards and he put their families behind them and says, now look, there's your wife. There's your family, your sons, your daughters. There's your clan. There's your people. Says, now don't be afraid. Remember the Lord and stand up and fight for your families. And as the verse goes on, we find that the walls did go up and the place of worship was restored. Their towns and their villages were rebuilt. As I think about that, it reminds us of us down here in the year 2015. We have a similar fight on our hands, and if you like, the enemy is coming and encroaching and even mining under the walls of our homes. The stats tell me that our children today are drowning. They're drowning in stuff. They say that Australia is now, our current generation is the richest generation that the world has ever seen. They have more money at their disposal. In fact, advertisers know that, and so they advertise not to mums and dads, they advertise to the kids because they know that pester power works really well. And so remember that ad recently where they're advertising a Ford Territory and there's a little boy at the front watching his friend hop into the Ford Territory. And so then he takes a big picture of a Ford Territory and he covers his car in that picture to make it look like a Ford Territory. The idea of keeping up with the Joneses. McDonald's knows this. McDonald's markets to children. Now, what they sell is not very healthy. In fact, it doesn't taste that good either. But they know that if they can market a small little toy to a child, that they will get mum and dad and grandma and grandpa along for the ride as well, and they're guaranteed of at least a $30 sale just by advertising a small gimmick to a child. Your marketers know that a multi-billion-dollar industry is found in marketing to our children. We have the problem today, what they call the sexualization of our children, where marketers and companies are marketing all for the dollar stuff to our children, which we don't really see as proper and right and true. Our children are under pressure like never before. I was reading recently a report about pornography, often the silent killer in our homes. And marketers now know that if they can reach our young boys especially before they even reach puberty at times, they're guaranteed of sales for life. And so they market to our boys. Now, what they do is they take over websites. So now if our young children doing an assignment Google the White House, it's been taken over by a pornographic company. And so this image comes up. And when the child sees this, oh, this is bad, so they press the cross button up in the top corner to close it down, and that's linked to an even worse image that comes up. And so the child presses that one, get rid of this, and an even worse image comes up. So that by the time the third image comes up, the child's now too embarrassed with what's on their screen to even talk to mum and dad about it. Yes, the pressures on our children are greater than ever before. Just this week, there's been quite some talk in our news stories about young 14-year-olds who've been groomed online by a teacher. And talking to an ex-police officer who goes around our schools now, Sharon McLean, and she goes into our schools and she's working with children. She said to me that these online predators can get access and start grooming your child within 30 seconds. That's how good they are. And I said to her, well, what's your advice? What can we do? I said the best thing you can do for parents is to tell them to have a mainframe computer, the whiz-bang bells and whistles, the best that they can ever have in the main part of their home, in their lounge room or in some media room or somewhere that everybody passes by, and any Googling that needs to occur occurs on that mainframe. The worst thing that ever got invented was Wi-Fi that allows the internet into our kids' bedrooms. And she said, for the first time in history, children now know more about something than their parents. When it comes to technology, when it comes to computers, they know more about what to do. It's almost like they're born knowing what to do than their parents do. And for the first time in history, they have that. And parents need to take control of their computers. Yes, the enemy has plans for our children. The question is, do we? They say that while our children are the richest generation the world has ever seen, they're also the most stressed generation the world has ever seen. They're also the most depressed generation the world has ever seen. They're also the most diagnosed generation the world has ever seen, and also the most medicated generation the world has ever seen. Now, I know we can argue the pros and cons of that, but that's what the stats are saying that our children are up against. In this whiz-bang world of technology that's now at warp speed, in this world where often homes are being challenged like never before, when the very walls of our homes have been undermined by Wi-Fi and technology and other things, the question's asked, what can we do? How can we raise a generation of faith in this day and age? Often, we've professionalised parenting and we've professionalised faith. We say, send your kids to us at church. We have the best programs. Or send your kids to us at school. We have the best ways to pass on faith. And don't get me wrong, the church and the school are extremely important in passing on faith. But so often we have encouraged our parents to send your kids and to pass off. We've professionalised everything. If you want to teach your children an instrument, then you find someone who's professional to teach them that instrument. If you want your child to learn ballet, you find the best ballet teacher. If you want them to learn soccer, you take them to soccer and get the best coach to teach them. We've taught our parents to go out and seek the best of everything. But also, when it comes to faith, often we've outsourced that to professionals as well. And all the stats are saying, when it comes to faith, children are more likely to adopt the faith of their parents. Now, for me as a dad, that's good news. But it's also scary news. Because that means my kids are watching me. They're watching me in my 24/7 living, not just in my Sabbath living. When I dust off my Bible, when I put on my tie and go to church. They don't just see Pastor Darren the preacher or Pastor Darren the balloon man. They see Pastor Darren the husband in my marriage and the way I treat my wife. They see Pastor Darren when the chips are down, when he's had a hard day at the office and he comes home depressed. They see Pastor Darren then. They see Pastor Darren in his tired moments, in his down moments, in his downtime, in his Googling time, in his TV watching time. And my kids are watching me 24/7. And they're more likely to adopt the 24/7 living faith that they see. Not the seventh-day faith, but the 24/7 living faith that they see. That's why Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 6 tells us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Then it says, teach these things to your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Moses is calling on the people of Israel, and notice he doesn't say just parents, he says Israel. He's calling on everyone to be faithful in your 24/7 living. One of the best things we do for our children is to equip our parents to be the best parents that they can be. And the school and the church need to surround these parents and surround these children. One of the best things we can do, according to recent research, is to put mentors into the lives of our children. Stats say that if children have one person beside their mum or dad who they can talk to about faith, then they're 26% more likely to stay in the church. Now I'll take that. I can do that. I can find those people of faith to invest into my children's lives. But the same research says if we can put 5 mentors, people that know our children by name, who are there for them, a bit like an adopted uncle or an aunt, who invest in them and are there for them in their 24/7 living, then those children are 46% more likely to stay in the church. I'll take that as a dad. And I can say that I stand here today as someone who grew up in the church, who stayed in the church and is now serving in the church. I stand here today because of the mentors. And I can name them to you one by one. But there's a whole cloud of them who invested in me as a young person. My teachers, my uncle, my adventurer leader, or back then it was called pre-JMVs, for those that are older, and my JMV leader, and my Pathfinder counsellors. We just lost her this week. Mrs. Basham, her name was. We used to call them Basham up Basham, but she never did that. She loved children, and she died just this week, and she never got married. But she was always the Pathfinder secretary for years. And she came hiking, and she came camping. She did all those things, did the swimming on her, and whatever else we had to do. She was right there alongside us doing that. And she was just like a piece of the furniture. But she loved each one of us. And Mrs. Basham, I believe, is a genuine saint who invested her life in those around her. And I stand here today because of people like her, who was just there for the kids. She died, I think it was at 98 years old. She died just last week. I thought she was old when I was a kid. But she passed to her rest, living her life for children. And God is calling on us. And we can each do that. We are never too old to invest in children, to call them by name, to affirm them, and to build them up. I was reading a book just recently written by Wes Stafford, who used to be the CEO of Compassion International and has put in place programs right around the world to build up children. And he wrote this book called Just a Minute. And it's a book full of stories where someone chose to take the time to spend just a moment with a child and to, and to invest in them. And he shows how that one moment can change a child's trajectory and put them on a path to greatness. You could be that moment, that minute, that event that invests in the life of a child. And God's calling us to do that in our 24/7 living. I'm so glad I had an uncle, Uncle Lionel, who was the head deacon of our Mildura Seventh-day Adventist church, who allowed me as a 7-year-old to follow him around. I remember helping him put out the ordnance bowls for the foot washing and filling them up with hot water. I remember helping him collect the offering. I used to walk down the aisle alongside him and he would help me collect up the offering, stack up the chairs, etc. I must have, looking back, really annoyed him because I was always under his feet. But he never once complained. And I saw Jesus in him. I saw Jesus in the people that invested in me. And here I stand. Psalm 78 says, we will not hide these truths. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. One of the best ways to invest in children is to tell them stories. Children need to hear stories. In fact, Sarah Arthur, a researcher in stories, said that stories give our children the weapons they need to defeat the dragons. And the dragons are real. They're out there, wanting to bring our children down. But the research says children need to hear the stories of God, the big Bible picture. Number one, need to hear the stories of the church universal. How has God's church prevailed down through the centuries? Need to hear the stories of the church denominational. Why does the Adventist church exist? Why were we raised up as a church? And what are we here for? And what are those stories? They need to hear the stories of the church local. Why does Alstonville exist? And who formed it? Who built it? And what are the things that happened here over the years that is part of your story? But most importantly, they need to hear your story. Why are you an Adventist Christian? And where has God come through for you? And the research says if children hear these different levels of stories, they're more likely to find their place in God's story and become a part of his story. I was reading other research recently about, they've done some work now on the brain, and the last probably 10 years has been huge quantum leaps in understanding the human brain. Just this week, they said that they've been able to now create the first neuron that actually replicates a bit like the brain. They're hoping that they might be able to eventually make a human brain. That's going to be interesting if they can, but they claim they're working towards that. But in their brain research, they actually did some imaging work on a good storyteller and some work on the children that were listening to the story. They actually looked at the brain patterns of them before the story, during the story, and after the story. And what they found was that the brain pattern that was happening as the teller told the story became replicated exactly in the listeners. And so it's almost like the listeners were experiencing the emotions and were experiencing the feelings and were feeling the same story as the teller. And I said that's why stories are so powerful at changing lives. And we all have a story to tell about what God has done and is doing for us. The time to invest in children is more important now than ever before. Why? Malachi chapter 4 tells us why, the last few verses in the Old Testament. Malachi chapter 4. And here we find in verse 4 it says, "Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave to him at Horeb for all Israel." So it says, remember all I spoke to Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Then it says, "See, I will send you the prophet Elijah for that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes." You know, we often stop there and we preach a good sermon. I've heard this preached over the years growing up in the church, where the preacher talks about the Elijah message. You've heard that preached. For those that have been in the church for a long time, you'll have heard the preaching talking about the Elijah message. The idea that we as a church have been raised up to like the prophet Elijah, to be the forerunner, to tell the world that Jesus is coming soon. Do you believe that? I believe that. I believe that we, the church, are raised up to take God's end time message to the world. A message of hope, a message of comfort, a message that tells us to get ready because Jesus is coming soon. That's the Elijah message. And I believe that. The signs tell me now more than ever that Jesus is coming soon. The prophecies tell me now more than ever that Jesus is coming soon. Even when you go to the movies these days, most movies have an apocalyptic type of nature to them. The idea that something big is about to happen. But when you read the Elijah message here, it says in verse chapter 6, "He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I will come and strike the land with a curse." Interesting way to end the Old Testament. It says the Elijah message, the Elijah is coming. I'm sending the prophet Elijah. Jesus says early on in the New Testament that John the Baptist is a type of Elijah. And he says even greater than Elijah. And we believe that we have that Elijah message. Just like John the Baptist foretold Jesus' birth, we're there to foretell and prepare the world for Jesus' second coming. But in the midst of that, it says the way that happens is for the hearts of the fathers, or some put the hearts of the parents, to be turned to their children, and the hearts of the children to be turned to their parents in reconciliation. And that allows God's message to sound with a resounding ring. That's why I guess when Joel talks about the Holy Spirit coming down, it says your young men will see dreams and visions, your old men will prophesy, and we'll all rise up together and take God's end time message out there. Because the Elijah message brings reconciliation. Growing up in the church, I often got quoted that our young people will finish the work. Ellen White says that. Our youth, our children will finish the work. And now, more than ever, I believe, is a time for us as a church to surround our children with mentors, with storytellers, with people who know them by name, who love them, who affirm them, who are there for them and support them and set them on a destiny, a mission, our mission, God's mission, the gospel message to all the world in this generation. That's my challenge to Alstonville Church, that you will be that church that loves its children dearly and with a sense of purpose, who surrounds them with mentors and grows them to be the spiritual champions that God is calling for this day and age. So that when Jesus comes very soon, he'll say, well done, Alstonville. Well done, mentors. Well done, families. Well done, children. Come and inherit the home prepared for you. Our loving Father in heaven, indeed you are coming again. Thank you for that promise. And we know that that's happening soon. The world tells us, the prophecies tell us, the signs tell us that you are coming soon. And you also say that children are number one in your kingdom. The kingdom belongs to them. So help us to do all we can to surround our children, our young people, our youth, our families, with people of faith, people who aren't perfect, but people who are on a kingdom journey and can show these children what that looks like. Helps us to love them, to know them by name, to take them on mission trips and justice trips, and to show them what it means to stand as a Christian in this 2015 world. That end, bless us and keep us. Bless Alstonville. Thank you for its Sabbath school leaders, for its Pathfinder leaders, for its venture leaders, for its elders, and for us as families. Help us to stand around our children and raise a generation of spiritual champions. Bless us and keep us to this end as we pray in thy name. Amen.